Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Agenda brought to you by New Narrative with me, PJ Thum. I am wearing a blue and white batik shirt, sitting with 3 other people behind a black table and in front of a wall full of oil paintings. My pronouns are he, him. Today on Political Agenda, we have Liyana Dhamirah, author, entrepreneur and politician, and Elijah Tay, student, and they're both members of Red Dot United, Singapore's newest political party. Political Agenda is brought to you by New Narrative, which is entirely reliant on membership subscriptions and donations. And if you find the work that we do important and relevant, please do join us as a member. Please do support us. You can join at newnarrative.com/join or donate at newnarrative.com/donate. We really need your support. We are entirely reliant on membership revenue, so we really do need you to join us as a member. Okay, and before we go on, here's Subash.
Stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far.
Okay, so here we are today with Liyana Dhamirah and Elijah Tay, Red Dot United members. But before we get to them, as always, my friend, my co-host, Sean Francis Han, Editor-in-Chief of Wake Up Singapore. How are you today, Sean?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, really excited to get into this one. We have one of the most interesting additions to the political scene in Singapore, and that's Liyana Dhamirah, entrepreneur, politician, and author as well. You've got a book that's just come out. So we're quite interested to get into that. But we also have here Elijah Tay, right? And we're going to find out more about you, but you are representing, or at least going to be speaking about your experiences with the youth wing of Red Dot United. But before we get into any of that, I'm wearing a white t-shirt, black jeans, and my pronouns are he, him. Liyana, can you tell us a little bit about what you're wearing and what your pronouns are?
Thank you. All right, so I'm Liyana Dhamirah. Currently, I'm wearing a navy blue top. We are in our party colors at the moment. I'm wearing a hijab as well, navy blue, and with khaki bottom, and my pronouns are she and her.
All right, Elijah, what about you?
Hey, I'm Elijah, and I'm also wearing the party attire, so navy blue top, khaki pants, and I also have green hair. I dyed my hair a few weeks ago. My pronouns are they, them.
All right. So, Liyana, let's just get right into it, right? Who are you and what made you decide to join politics? I mean, you've got a story that, spans a book, at least, many more, hopefully, to come. But yeah, just briefly tell us, who are you? And then what made you decide to join politics?
I would say that I am an everyday person. So I am any other common person on the street walking. What differentiates me is just that I have a book that came out, which you mentioned and introduced me about just now. What made me join politics is because throughout the years of championing for other parties, other people, and especially in the social causes that I have the passion in, I've seen that things are moving very slowly, and because that there is a need for change in the upper level where we introduce policies and affect in our country where we shape and mold the society, right? So that was what compelled me to join politics.
Okay. So why did you decide to join Red Dot United and not, say, a larger, more established party? Why the new kid on the block?
Okay, interesting fact. I'll give you some juice here, okay?
All right, let's get this.
Interesting fact is that I've been approached by one party before, a member from the party, and that particular individual was asking me why am I doing what I'm doing back then. And we are talking about 2019.
Sure.
So before the election was during 2020, right? And this particular individual was asking me if instead of doing whatever that I'm doing right now, why not join his party and be a part of the regular meet the people sessions and see the people from the ground and help directly. So it enticed me actually at the point of time. And coming from someone who is in the politics space, telling me that I shouldn't be involved in politics when we had that conversation, he was sharing with me not to be a part of any party
Okay.
that compels me further, that interests me further actually. Why is he telling me not to, right?
Okay, right. So let me get the story straight. So somebody from a political party came up to you and said, don't join a political party. So were you sort of toying with the idea of joining politics? Why did this person feel the need to make that comment?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So I wasn't toying. I didn't. Okay, the idea didn't occur. It didn't occur to me before in joining any political party.
All right.
However, this particular individual who approached me, he got to know about me from my book.
Yeah.
So he said that he read my book. He read the interviews that I had in the papers, and one that came across to him was the Straits Times interview. So that was when he reached out, and that was when he shared with me all of these pointers of the not tos.
Okay.
When he knows that he did mention that he did some checks on me, and he knows who are the people that I'm affiliated with, and gave me some sort of a sense of, I don't know. To me, it come across like a warning.
Yeah, that sounds quite creepy, but
yeah, it sounds creepy actually. However, what interests me is after that conversation, right, and having him approach me in person and telling me not to join politics, not to be affiliated with it, not to, get my hands dirty in all of this, it makes me become much more interested in why shouldn't I be in this space, right? So I hope that spells out the reason why I am in this space right now.
okay, so I think that spells out why you got into politics. But why did you decide to get to the RDU?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming from someone from the established party, and we're talking about an established party here, right? And doing my own research, looking at all the other parties that is around, that has been around for years, the changes that they have done, the policies that they have introduced, or the bill that they have run in Parliament, it made me realize that there are still gaps there.
Yeah.
And when we are talking about politics, the connotation that goes around it are usually not really that positive. Usually it's the negative connotations. And I find that even positive politics itself, there's a gap, a missing piece there. And on that note, given that there are parties that has been established for years already, given that this era up to this date, we are still facing a lot of issues that can be, looked into if someone were to have compassion. That was what compels me to, join RDU, because we are new. And being new, we have the I would say the leverage on introducing fresh perspective, fresh people, and as well as the things that are in the gaps right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So speaking of fresh ideas and fresh perspectives, let's get into the party's core values, right? So what are the party's core values? And I think broadly, what is your vision for Singapore?
Okay.
What do you see Singapore as being able to become?
I see Singapore as a society that is compassionate, that we leave no man behind, and we work together as a larger community to bring each other to a better life and greener pastures.
Okay, and I suppose that's the core values.
Oh, the core values
Yes,
of
yeah, what are
RDU. Okay, so that will be faith. In short, we have that as an acronym actually.
Okay.
I see you're looking at my notes.
So yeah, I can see that. Faith and H3. So
yes, faith
that's-
and H3.
What's that?
So F is for fairness, A for accountability, I for integrity, T for transparency, and H3 is for happiness, hope, and heart.
Okay, that's really beautiful. That's really heartwarming on a Saturday morning. But I need to ask, aren't these things that every party is going to say they firmly stand behind? I kind of want to know what makes RDU special. There's no party that's like, I don't like faith, I don't like integrity, none of that stuff for me, please. Every party's going to stand behind these things. But
Yeah.
what makes RDU have that X factor for you?
I would say is the do. So it's not just about saying, not just about communicating the values, but actually actualizing it and embodying it in oneself. And I see that in not only the founders of the party, but I see that most of the members that RDU is attracting right now.
Okay. So it's very based on the people who are in the party, the things that they do, rather than any one specific manifesto or one specific core value. Am I right to say that?
It initially boils down from the people in the party, right?
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, who draw out the manifesto, who writes it out?
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So it's the
right.
people.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, can I press you on that? When you say who writes it, so there is an overwhelming impression of most opposition political parties being, one or two man shows, right, or person shows.
Yeah.
But are you suggesting that, or rather, how does RDU come up with its manifesto? Is it more of an internal town hall collaborative process, or do you still have a very hierarchical sort of internal structure? How do these ideas go from sort of values to policy, and who writes the manifesto, basically?
Okay, it's interesting when you mentioned about hierarchical and top-down kind of approach and town hall meeting and all that. So for us in RDU, we always do a meeting where most of the members will come together, and then we talk about the issues that we have seen, whatever that is, appalling in the parliament or whatever during the speech. And from there, all of us will come together to talk about what are if we are talking about the manifestos, right, that we've churned out for the past GE. It's a work of more than 10 people. Honestly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a collaborative effort from town hall meeting to the EXCOs, the executive committee of the association coming together. And we even debate on some stuff internally. And that's how actually our manifesto is being written and put out.
Nice. Elijah, I want to get your perspective here. You're really, really young. You're 19 years old. You just finished your A-levels, looking for university right now. I want to figure out, from your perspective, what drew you to the RDU? What was the X factor that they had?
I guess last year was actually the first time that I actually paid attention to the general elections, because the previous time I was in lower sec and I didn't really care about these stuff yet. So RDU just happened to be contesting in my GRC, so I guess that gave me a reason to pay more attention to the policies and values that they were trying to push out, or the principles that they stood by. And it was also convenient for me to just volunteer for them at that point in time, especially since I was busy with A-level preparations as well.
Okay.
So I guess the draw factor what contributed to the draw factor is how the things that they rolled out, or the things that they were putting out, aligned a lot with what I personally believed in as well.
Okay.
So for instance, they did push for the lowering of, what's that called? The single persons purchasing housing.
Okay.
They wanted the age to be lower, and also the green charter that they rolled out at that point in time. So I think that these are the things that really appeal to me as someone who cares about social justice and human rights, these kind of things. So that was what drew me to pay more attention to the party, on top of them contesting in my region, which was something I had to consider, since although I wasn't voting, but I had friends of voting age, I had family members and relatives of voting age living around in the GRC. So paying attention to what they were doing, and also working with them as a volunteer could help me get more insights and understand what they were pushing out better .
Okay.
So I guess the question here would more so be the question here would more so be what kept me in the party, and rather than like what drew me in the party. So I think like like after volunteering for a while, I realized that like what Lyanna said, the people here really stand for the values that we push by, like the faith age tree. And I feel the sincerity not just in the people who I was volunteering alongside with, but also the political candidates like Lyanna and Ravi themselves also. I've interacted with them personally, they've looked out for me, and when I was doing some like research work with them, also like Michelle was looking out for me and making sure that it wasn't disrupting my A-level preparations and things like that. So I really feel the sincerity in how they look out for people and really stand up for these like policies that are really people focused and people centric and really just want to make society a better place for everyone.
Yeah, I wanna kind of turn my attention now to Lyanna. So you ran you ran in GE 2020, right? I kind of want to know, what were the main issues that you were pushing for, right? Both politically and personally, right? What are the core issues that you really, really want to see changed if you were to be elected?
Okay, I think one of the issues that was prominent and something that I brought out during the election was the HDB rental policies.
Okay.
So that was one. Apart from that is the welfare state that we have right now, the system, the welfare system that we have right now in Singapore, as well as the, shall we go down to the migrant issues as well?
I mean, if that's one of the core issues that you're fighting for.
Well, I think for me, personally,
Yeah.
I fight for a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And it usually derives around social issues, social injustice and all of that. So I'm leaning towards that.
Yeah.
But when we are talking about politics here, we have to be sensitive in looking at it in a national perspective as well.
Yeah.
So what are the national issues, right? Economy is a factor, and if you are going to go into all those progressive wages and all of that, so yeah.
So I just want to point out here that I think that there's a very interesting link between you as a person and your story and the issues that you're championing, right? So I think for the viewers out there who may not be familiar with the story, can you give us sort of a quick rundown? Yeah.
A quick,
It's
brief summary.
A brief summary. I mean, it's everywhere. There have been a lot of interviews done, and you can read the book, which has all of the details.
I'm holding up the book here
Yeah.
for those of you watching.
Okay. I just
Well, I'll get you to
Thank
sign
you for
this
bringing the book.
Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions from the book, actually. I'm very curious about stuff. But please.
that would be another
go on.
interview in itself.
Yeah, I know. We don't have the time.
So if we can sort of get a short summary of the book,
Which is
And
called
yourself.
Homeless, the Untold Story of a Mother's Struggle in Crazy Rich Singapore.
That's right. Okay, so the brief story is I used to come from poverty. So like my introduction earlier, I'm an everyday common man, right? So you can see me walking down the street. So I'm like you. I take the train, I take the bus, and in my book, as a brief summary of my story, is that I used to be a teen mom. So I got pregnant with my first child at the age of 16. I got homeless and kicked out of my in-law's flat at the age of 22. And by that time, I'm pregnant with my third child. And I had to resort to camping and sleeping in a tent by Sembawang Beach for 3 months. And along the way, I went to various organizations, helping organizations as they used to, position themselves as, try to seek help, but I got nada. So at the end of the third month of sleeping in a tent, I actually resort to the fact, or even, like told myself that there isn't hope. And when you're down, out of your luck, right, in this area, you will need to fend for yourself. And there's no one to help you. Yeah, so it's not even, I'm not even asking the government to help me, just someone out there.
Yeah.
So what happened was I met, back then, I only knew them by their first name, Andrew and Ravi.
All right.
And it was just a chance encounter during one night in 2009. And they were the ones who wrote in to my MPs.
Okay.
Yeah, in the constituency that I'm in, and appeal on my behalf.
Okay.
And what is interesting is that it was a chance encounter, and we just met for one time that night. But whatever that I've worked for the months before just came into fruition after that one chance encounter. Yeah. And it is interesting that why does it take an external third party people to write in on my behalf to get the help that I have tried to find myself. And so that's the gist of it.
Okay.
So long story short, after I got the help that I need, so I got welfare aid, I went through the system. Before even getting into the system, I know how hard it is to get in, right? Going through the system, getting out of it. So that's the main gist of what I've written in my book.
So this is the part that I think I find most compelling about you as a politician, because a lot of politicians, everybody knows their ivory tower, military generals, they come from a lot of privilege, but you have really, really seen the underbelly. You've seen the way that social services works. You've seen the way that the rental housing system works. You've seen the way welfare works in Singapore. So you've really seen it from the inside.
Yes.
And from that perspective, can you tell us what are the major issues wrong with the rental housing system as well as with the welfare system in Singapore?
Okay, so since we are touching on the rental, the HDB rental policies, right?
Yeah.
Right now they have like a income cap, where they will draw a line who deserve to get into the rental housing
Where's
system.
the cap at, roughly?
Currently, right now, it's set at $1,500 a month.
Okay.
So, on that note in itself, right, it is already perplexing for most of the people in the situation. So, we are talking about the families who are earning around that kind of wages. And they are the ones who will need the rental, the subsidized rental from HDB, right? And not to rent in the outside market because it's exorbitant. The rental fees are exorbitant. And these families are usually earning around 1,800, 2,000 around there.
Okay.
And we're talking about a nucleus of a mother and father with young kids. And they're looking for a rental property because they could not buy for whatever means. They do not have the financial stability yet to own a house. And even that, I've met families who would have to choose between trying to prove themselves eligible or within that income spec that was capped at 1,500, or getting a promotion from their company. So, for example, they are earning at the moment 1,004, and then they are being offered a position in the company, let's say as a supervisor, and then it allows them to earn $1,008 or $2,000 a month. So, because they will need a roof over their head, it drive them to a choice where they have to make, which is to take up the offer, get $2,000 a month, or stay where they are just to prove that they will need this rental house so that they can put a roof over their family head.
What about the welfare system?
Ooh. You want to get there?
I want to get far into that. Yes, I want to figure that out. Yes.
All right. So for the welfare system, it looks nice on data, on paper, stating that they are helping X amount of people, with whatever financial assistance or job placements and all that. But in reality of the fact is that I met many families who do not benefit from such aid. Okay. One being so that in order for them to get the financial assistance, they will need to prove with so many documents. They will need to strip off their dignity and really tell the story of why they are there. Yeah, and that in itself is, as a human, you are degrading another human just to get help. Which for me,
you're degrading yourself to kind of qualify for this?
For aid.
Okay.
Yeah. So to me, if that is our country's welfare system, we're not doing it for the heart of helping another human being. Yeah.
So I want to ask, how do you see this changing? What kind of change would you like to see? What kind of policy would you like to advance in this area? Because I think it could be quite a tricky issue, right? I think on one hand, you want to make sure that the rental housing is available to those who really need it, and you know that you don't get people abusing the system, right? But at the same time, it's a really dumb problem to have if you have being forced to decide between housing and a raise. So how do you propose that we solve that?
Speak to the people.
Okay.
Get data. Get the real life on the ground data.
Yeah.
Because right now I question the data that our the current ruling party or the government in itself is working on in garnering. Because from the data itself, it speaks as to what the people really need.
Yeah.
But then it kind of contradicts the kind of policies that we set out with the needs that the people on the ground have.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, there are a lot of saying that, we are doing this because we do not want people to either game or to abuse the system, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are the other hands of the people who do not have access to all of this aid that they require.
Yeah.
And on that note, if we were to be, if the parliament are able to garner the right data from the right people where they are at, then we will introduce sound policies and policies which is relatable to the everyday needs or the current needs.
I mean, I 100% agree with you here.
I can jump in. It sounds, and disagree with you a bit. We do have the data, right? What's Enough.sg has done extensive surveys and shown, and these are some of the best, sociological professors in Singapore, and we know how much a family, say a single person or a couple of two, need to have a basic, to meet their basic living expenses. So the data is there, right? I just pulled it up while you were talking, and they actually have very exact numbers. 2,351 per month for a coupled elderly household. So two people in an elderly household to meet basic standards of living needs 2,351 a month. For a single person, 55 to 64, 1,721 per month. So that's way higher than the threshold that is, you've told us for the rental flat, right? So the data is there. New Narrative recently ran an article where we estimated a family, a hawker family, right? 2 adults, 1 child, to have a minimum standard of respectable living where it's not just subsistence, but you have basic dignity, would be about 4,500 a month. The numbers are out there to do the research, but the government is not listening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now the question is, we have the data, but what is the government doing with the data?
Yeah.
Right? Are they shoving it one side, or are they taking the data really into account with all the policies that they are introducing out there?
Yeah. So I mean, I agree 100% that the data it is there, right? But we lack that perspective, and I think this is where yourself and the RDU bring something very interesting to the table, because data is just numbers, it's just stats, right? They're just figures, right? But if you don't have that perspective which you provide, right, then it's going to be very hard to interpret that data. But I think once we move beyond just interpreting the data, I'm curious as to how exactly we're going to push and to fix this system, or how we're going to begin to push for new policy ideas that are going to help us rectify this problem that we have. So do you have any ideas on that?
One of the reasons why I said okay to running for the past election is the possibility of getting a seat in parliament, right? And having that seat in parliament equals to having the chance or the platform to ask and raise the right questions to the current people who are in parliament right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, the people here on the ground, we do have our own, even Elijah, they are doing the kind of social work that they are doing,
Yeah.
right? And myself, I currently are also involved in other NGOs, and the ground sentiments is not being pushed up to the people at the top.
Yeah.
And the people at the top are the ones that are in power to push out the policies. So there is a contradiction there.
I fully agree, but I think also that there is a little bit of a sentiment that the opposition is really just there, or it exists only for the purpose of raising questions, right? And then, poking holes and saying, this is bad, this is not so good, right? And that's all that they exist for. If you're looking for policy ideas, if you're looking for policy initiatives, don't look at the opposition. They're not going to give that. They're just there to raise questions. So,
which isn't even true, because so we're recording this 27th March. We just had a session of Parliament, and what was basically the session of Parliament involved the Workers' Party giving a good suggestion, and the PAP saying, "Oh, no need," and then the Workers' Party gives a good suggestion, and PAP says, "Oh, that's we've already got stuff to cover that." They clearly don't, and another good suggestion like, "Oh, no," and they just ignore it. So how do we even if you get into Parliament, right, and the Workers' Party is there, and they're making good, solid suggestions, but they're being ignored. And then once in a while, the PAP, will shamelessly co-opt. They've co-opted a lot of SDP suggestions and Workers' Party suggestions with no acknowledgement, and pretended it was their idea all along. So is that all that opposition parties can hope to change, or do you have a different vision for what you would do if you want a seat?
First and foremost, I think, since we are talking about numbers here, right? I mean, let's get to the fact that in Parliament, how many seats are there being hosted by the ruling party, and then how many seats are being won by those in the ruling party, and how many seats are being, actually productively taken by the opposition parties. So if we are talking about numbers, just in Parliament in itself, we got to have more people in there, and more people meaning to say that those from the opposition parties, because if we are looking at it as a numbers game, right? Numbers, the amount of people will help to also decide or even be a factor in the decision making process. Right now, look at the numbers. What are the numbers tilting towards to, and who is in the ruling party right now?
I wanna kind of come back to something that we sort of touched on a little bit just now, and that's the youth wing, right? And I want to direct this question to the both of you, and I want to find out what is the function, or what do you see as being the function or purpose of the youth wing?
I would say that as what I initially mentioned just now, fresh perspective.
Okay.
And introducing the gaps that we see, and championing for it with new vigor. Because the youth wing will be the youths are our next people who will be leading the government, the country, right? So we will have to start somewhere.
Okay.
And having a youth wing, it helps to get to that day.
Is the goal to sort of groom young talent to run for Parliament, run in the next election as a candidate?
Well, at least expose them to the whole process.
Okay.
Currently right now, even in the social settings, or your everyday settings in life, I'm not sure about yourself, but for me, being a trooping Singaporean here, I was told in everyday settings not to talk about politics in public. Even at a kopitiam, or when I'm having my meals and just having a conversation with another friend, they will usually shush me and say, don't talk about politics, you will get into trouble. So that has been usually the thinking around it.
Okay.
That has been drilled down since years ago. And we're talking about different age gaps here, right? So from the elderly to the current young ones. And we need to change that. So if you are thinking, are you having youth wing insert in terms of like that kind of grooming through that sector, then let them have that exposure.
Okay. Elijah, what about you? What do you think is the function of the youth wing?
Yeah, I think like what Lyanna said, like perspectives, right? I think as much as we want to give like the youth perspective on like what politics is and like how to navigate the political space, especially since we're gonna have elections like say every like 4 to 5 years. That means 17 and 18-year-olds today, they should start paying attention to politics now so that they can make a more informed choice when they get to vote in the next election. So I think the role that we play here would be to have some sort of resources available so that the youth will be able to be more informed in their political decisions, and also be able to understand like anything relating to politics, parliament, and all that stuff, so that they would understand the importance of the choice they make when they eventually get to vote, and also the factors they should consider before deriving to their decision of what do they stand for, who do I want to cast my vote for. So I guess that's the perspective that we can provide to them. Right. And it's a two-way thing, right? It's a conversation. So on the other end also, we want to get perspective of the youth. What are things that you care about? What are things that we can look into, research on, and really find solutions, think of solutions of how we can support you better as our people in this country, and how we can roll out policies and continue having like discussions of things that you care about and you find important. Because after all, we are going to be like, the youth are the future, and the youth are going to be leaders of tomorrow, and also the people who would be living in the society that we are building for them right now. So it's important that we gain perspectives from them as well, and envision the world that they hope to see when that they want to grow up in.
So question for you, Elijah. We've had a lot of young people on our podcast. It's part of our current series to really look at how young people are trying to create change. And you're the first person who's actually trying to create change by joining a political party. All the other university students, university age people that we've had on chose to go into different kinds of activism, right? We've had SG Climate Rally, we've had people who LGBTQIA plus activism, right? People who work on poverty issues, migrant workers, all that sort of thing. So why join politics as opposed to go into issue-based activism?
I mean, on a personal note, I do also do issue-based activism. I run pages like Microstory SG, which brings light to discrimination against LGBTQ plus persons in Singapore. And I guess like through activism, advocacy, interacting with people, and just hearing about people's experiences, I realized that a lot of discrimination that happens, a lot of suffering that people have in this society has a lot to do with systemic issues, and how that boils down to these barriers that people have to go through, the administrative processes, the laws and regulations that prevent people from living as equal citizens. So I guess that's what drew me, like gave me the interest to go into politics, because that's where systemic change happens.
But how do you feel like, I think, how would you respond, I suppose, to other activists who are trying very hard to be non-partisan, especially in a environment which you are punished very much for not aligning yourself with the governing party? So people, it's almost a defensive mechanism to say, I am non-partisan, and I work with any party to focus on the issue, right? To kind of de-emphasize this, or blunt these attacks, inevitable attacks from the governing party. But you have chosen to overtly join a political party, and not just that, but volunteer yourself for our podcast and be seen as being someone who's engaging both in activism and partisan politics. Do you see these as opposed to each other? Do you see yourself as having difficulties in the future if someone says, "Oh, you're just doing this because you're trying to promote your political party or win power," or how would you think? How would you respond to this question, to this situation that we have in Singapore?
Yeah, I think like when it comes to advocacy, it's very diverse, and there's no one way that advocacy looks like. So I think it's okay that like there are And I think it's great, not just okay, that like there are people who are not party affiliated and just approaching various parties just to push their cause, right? And I guess like for me, because I see how this party's values and principles do align with what I stand for in terms of the strong push for human rights and equality and things like that. So I don't see a conflict in how my activism, I see that like my activism and my work in politics are very closely aligned, because the ultimate goal is still making sure that or at least trying my best to make sure that we live up to what our pledge says, a democracy where there's justice and equality. Yeah.
Okay. I wanna kind of get your perspective on this. What is the relationship of the youth wing to the party as a whole? And I think what I mean by that is, I sort of asked about I sort of asked Lyanna just now about, is it a platform to groom young candidates, right? But I kind of want to get to know, do you affect the decisions? Do you affect the writing of the manifesto? Are you engaged in the selection of the topics that are pushed for or championed? I mean, what kind of impact does the youth wing have?
Yeah.
Well, actually, before you even answer that, how big is the youth wing? How many people are in it?
How big? Liyana, do you want to answer that?
I couldn't give the exact figure right
A
now.
gauge,
We are
maybe?
still growing.
All right.
At the moment, what I know is that we have about 70 members.
All right.
Part of the youth wing.
Oh, you have 70 members part of the youth wing. Wow. Okay.
Do you have any
But
idea
no
of
exact numbers, okay?
I mean, that's 70 is... Well, I mean, even if we drop that by 10 or whatever, I mean, that's a really good number, right? So, okay.
But do you have an idea of demographics? Like just, aga, like how many men, how many women? Okay, never mind. Genders. We don't want to go into binary thing. In terms of the political issue of Singapore, right? There are certain ethnic and gender issues which actually are there's a lot of discrimination, and it's important to have representation. Do you feel that you have representation of a broad swath of Singapore in the youth wing and in the
Yes.
party as a whole?
Yes. So in terms of representation, on a broad spectrum across, yes, we do. And if we are talking about the demographics of, I don't know, shall we get into race here?
It is relevant to the Singapore
relevant,
context
yeah.
because there's a lot of racial discrimination in Singapore.
Yeah, so if you are talking about race here, I would say across the board, across all races, the representation is equal.
Okay.
Equal as in equal to the overall national percentage, or equal as in you have actually equal numbers of CMIO? What do you mean by equal?
Okay, all right. So if we go to CMIO, it'll be all right, equal numbers of CMIO.
CMI and O. So,
Okay.
Oh wow, okay, that's very interesting.
Right.
Huh, that's very diverse. Well, and sort of within the youth wing, is it is there a sort of when I spoke to PSP, they said their youth wing is actually in their late 20s and very male. Right, and then SDP, we haven't had that podcast yet, but they said their youth wing is actually very young, right, late teens, early 20s. Do you have an idea of the age range of your youth wing?
Oh, okay. So Elijah is, what age range are you, Elijah?
I'm 19 this year.
Yeah, so you are in the late teens range, right? So we have late teens, early 20s, and late 20s too. Yeah,
Okay.
and youth. If you are going in the national sector, the youth will be up to 35, right?
I mean, it's
It's
very
up
it's
to you.
arbitrary.
Every party defines it differently.
Yeah, so we have the late teens, early 20s, late 20s, and the early 30s.
Okay.
So more or less even distribution, you think, between those?
Yeah, more or less even distribution, yes.
Oh,
That's why I say it's
cool.
equal in terms of CMIO, it's equal it's diverse in terms of the demographics of the age range as well. Yeah, if
Cool.
that helps to
Okay.
understand.
Yeah.
And there's power in diversity, right?
I would, yeah.
Definitely.
So what is the role of the youth wing? Like, what is your relation to the party? Do you affect the discussions? Do you affect the manifesto? What goes out? The issues that are pushed? What effect does the youth wing actually have on the party as a whole?
I mean, like what we discussed earlier, I think that the youth wing has a strong potential of providing perspectives, as in like giving us a perspective of what would be important for the party to focus on in terms of the issues that youth care about and the ideas that they may have in terms of responding to these issues. So I think that might be the one of the key roles that the youth wing might play. I guess like also just having a like safe space for discussion and discourse as well, in terms of discussing our national politics or just like social issues.
And not having the no, we cannot talk about politics.
I also found it very interesting that you run an LGBTQIA Facebook Instagram page. Am I right? So I think that's really fascinating, and you're in the youth wing of this party, right? And I think most people would associate maybe a party like the SDP with being LGBTQIA friendly, right? So I kind of want to know, how does RDU relate to these issues of gender and sexuality, diversity, about LGBTQIA issues? What is their stance, or what is their relationship with these issues?
Hold on, before we get into that, a question from the Discord. A member prompted me. The obvious question I didn't ask is actually, what is your representation across different genders and a bit harder to say, but different sexualities? Do you feel like you have diversity in that area as well?
That's a good question. Thank you to whoever asked. Okay, I wouldn't say equal on that, because we will still need to have a better representation in regardless of gender. And hang on, what was the question again?
Diversity across gender within the party and within the youth wing.
Yeah, so in terms of diversity across gender, yes, we do have. But in terms of the numbers, we can still improve.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're still growing, so.
So I mean, so coming back to Elijah,
Yep.
how does the party kind of relate with LGBTQIA issues? Is it something that can be discussed? Is it something that you want to push for? How does the party kind of navigate that?
I guess this is definitely something that we can discuss, because these are things that are pertinent to what the youth care about today, like LGBTQ+, climate change, racism, things like that.
Yeah.
So there's definitely room for discourse and room for discussion as well, in terms of like what are the areas that we care about and want to see change in, and what are the policies that we want to push for, what are the ideas we have right now, what are we thinking about these issues, right? So like for RDU, because we stand for like equality, we stand for justice, we stand for human rights. So it's I guess it's natural for us to also be inclusive of LGBTQ+ persons as well. And I don't think we have a hard stance at this point in time, but we will definitely bring these things up in discussion whenever we have it.
Okay. All right. So I guess on that note, is there a kind of disconnect between the youth wing and the party as a whole, right? And I'm asking that because I think the youth generally have a politics that is about inclusivity, that's about structural issues, that's about social justice, right? And I think the old guard, or at least the traditional way of doing politics in Singapore, is pragmatics, bread and butter issues, right? Let's get the GRC, let's find out a way to connect to the working class Singaporean. So is there a kind of disconnect in the RDU between maybe the more idealistic, more social justice oriented youth wing on one hand, and the more bread and butter, more pragmatic party as a whole?
I don't think there's a disconnect. It's more of like how we find middle ground. Because like when we talk about social issues like LGBTQ+ or racism, these are bread and butter issues because they affect people on the day-to-day. So even if you want to talk about it in a pragmatic sense, yes, we need to care about these issues because people are suffering, people are having like issues that seriously affect mental health because of the policies that are still in place that continue to discriminate these people.
All right. You should run. I mean, that's a really good answer. I think, I think the framing of that question is often very problematic, as if LGBTQ people weren't like bread and butter, as if they weren't themselves working class. But so, yes, great answer there. But okay, now I want to turn my attention now to you, Lyanna. Why did you run for leader of the youth wing? I mean, what did you hope to achieve by taking up this role?
Honestly, at that point of time, being new, RDU is still very small, and we are at a stage where we are still growing, and the other members in RDU does not fall in the youth sector. So naturally, me being still classified as a youth, and given someone who have had an experience in going through the whole process of the whole election, I would say that I just step up to it and volunteer. I wouldn't say that I run for it, but I volunteer for it. And more so now that because we are still growing and we have seen potentials in the current members that we have, so we would love it if there are others who would step up.
So how do you build support for the party how do you build support for the youth wing? How do you get people interested, young people interested in joining the youth wing? How do you rally them? How do you sort of speak to their interests?
Continuing the political discourse online, as well as organizing town hall meetings often. And we still do our door-to-door, right? And we meet all the other youths in the constituency that we are currently in.
Elijah, I mean, when you joined the youth wing, right, what did your friends and family think? I'm just quite curious about this bit. And then how do you sort of reach out to people and say, hey, this is something interesting that's happening. We want to engage you. We want to engage your ideas and perspectives. I mean, just what's your experience been like in the youth wing?
I guess like when it comes to my parents, they know that I've always been interested in doing like advocacy work. They had foreseen that like I would possibly get involved in politics in some way. So they weren't really shocked by it or anything. But when I talk to my mom about these things, she does reflect that she's proud of me for like stepping up and doing these things for the people, which is something that I guess like keeps me going and motivates me as well, knowing that my parent is supportive of what I'm doing, although they might still have differing views, I guess, on certain issues, on inclusivity and things like that.
What about your friends in your immediate social circle? How did they react?
Oh, I guess they also just saw it coming. They're like, that's Elijah, that's what they do. So there wasn't much of a shock factor, I guess. It's just something that people would see me like naturally falling into, I guess. And it's been largely supportive because they think that it's great that I'm getting more involved in like politics and like helping onto like interviews like this to really share my perspective and get more youth interested in politics as well through me, because there is like, in terms of like social media, a large part of my audience are people who are youth. So when they see me getting involved in like politics, they like quite a number of them get interested in like reading about these stuff as well. I've received like direct messages where people say like, hey, I really admire the work you do, and like because you were posting this stuff, because you were like speak about this stuff, I got more interested in reading up as well, and like thank you for that and things like that. So like I guess that also like plays a huge part in like keeping me going in speaking up like for what I believe in and putting it through action in terms of my advocacy work, in terms of being involved in politics. So I guess that's like the receptivity has been largely positive. All
right. So I want to sort of get into the last section of the interview here, right? And Lyanna, I want to kind of figure out from you, how do you think we should or could create change? Basically, I want to figure out what's your theory of change. How do you see yourself as an agent of change in Singapore and in the world?
I think for me, in my own theory of change, is to be the example.
Okay.
And being being the example means to do the actions, not only preaching what you think is morally right also, and at the same time doing all of it with others in mind.
All right. So I love that broad overarching theory of change, right? I want to kind of zero in on the Singapore situation. What do you think is the change that opposition politicians can and need to bring to the table in a one-party state? I think a lot of people have the idea, opposition is just there to criticize the government. It's just there for like parliamentary representation. Or some would even say, it doesn't need to be there at all, right? Or it's a PAP light, whatever. There are a lot of weird perspectives on the opposition. But what do you think is the role of the opposition in creating change for Singapore?
That will be not only to question, but to push for the ideas that we have already brought up into Parliament. Well, I'm talking as if I'm already in Parliament like that, huh?
Dress for the job you want, but yeah.
But I think in terms of the change that we are still working on right now, would be to just, keep on with the hard work in pushing it according to the current national state ideals that they have, challenging it, and also to not only introduce the solutions, but acting on the solution, and providing the data that, hey, this can be done.
Okay.
Yeah. If it is happening, why do we still face the disapproval of it?
So I want to kind of, hone in on that one word that you used just now, which is push for change, right? I mean, apart from critique and collecting data, what goes into this push? What goes into championing issues, right? I think some people would criticize the opposition and say, they're only around when it's time to run for election, but what are they doing from year 0 to year 4, right? So yeah, what goes on in those 4 years?
In the push, you mean?
Yeah, in that push, in that 4-year push before the elections come.
That is more grassroots, more meeting people, more continuing to communicate what we are fighting hard for in person, and doing the legwork. So we can't be lazy. We were not lazy. And it's not fair that right now to still uphold to the thinking that opposition political parties are just here during the election. Yeah.
So can you give me, just the most meaningful or the most impactful example of legwork that you've done since the election that you think has really created a difference, made an impact in the community that you're serving?
I think one of it is having people like Elijah join us. That will be one of the impact that that sort of validates the work that we do, the legwork, the groundwork, and also having this interview with New Narrative. Right? We got your attention on us too, right? In a way.
Yeah, definitely.
So that should come across as an impact somehow. As well as we are just not here for the one-off. We do go to show that we are here for the long haul.
All right, that's very nice to hear. Elijah, I think a lot of youth feel a little bit disenchanted with politics in general and opposition politics, and I myself am not really sure if I'm all that interested in joining our opposition party, right? I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect between the youth of Singapore, the youth of the world, and then the way that the government does politics, the way that Singapore culture presents politics, right? So, how do you think the youth are going to relate to a political future, right, in a one-party state, in a state where politics has just never really been discussed, where it's not encouraged, right, where you could face the threat of a diminished career by getting into it? How do you think the youth are going to inherit this political landscape? How do you think they're going to react to it?
I think a lot of it is like increasing the space for conversations.
Yeah.
Because I think right now, especially with the internet age, people have a lot more access to resources, to reading up about politics, not just in our homeland, but also in other countries as well. I think like, especially with more discourse, like last year with the whole US elections and everything, I think people are more interested in learning more about politics as well, and reading up about how it might relate to them as a person in Singapore who is affected by these politics.
Yeah.
So I think that honestly, largely, I think people are still going to be silent on it, or like stay pretty like apolitical about these things. But I think underneath the surface, like on a personal level, people still do engage in these conversations. Like for me, I was in a school that was rather conservative.
Okay.
But even then, maybe I'm just lucky that I have a good like social group. But like even then, like when I was interacting with people in my school, in my batch, people who weren't friends, but like people who I just casually met through events and things like that.
Yeah.
Politics wasn't something that was very shunned. Like we could still talk about it, we could still talk about what our views are, but perhaps people like they won't like post like infographics onto their Instagram stories and that kind of things. But on a personal level, I think there is still discussions about this, and there is more space to think about what we want to see in the future of our politics, and where the education system is lacking in informing our young citizens on these things. I think the internet has been very helpful in providing these resources. Yeah.
From your vantage point, right, and you've got a very unique vantage point here, right, at being so young, right, are you hopeful for the future of this country, right? Are you optimistic about the way that the youth are going to come out and create change in the years to come?
I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, but I am hopeful. And I think like being hopeful is not just about like, hoping that people will pay more attention, but actually putting the action and the work into it, engaging with people on the ground, and talking to youth across different backgrounds and things like that. So I am hopeful. And I guess the results of this hopefulness would reflect through the work that I do alongside other people involved in politics as well, in engaging the youth, in engaging the general like population, in getting interested in what are the policies affecting their day-to-day, what are the policies affecting the people around them who of whom like they might not relate their experiences to. Yeah.
Okay.
If I can ask both of you about education policy, which I think both of you would have very interesting perspectives on, because Lyanna, in your book, you actually made a very significant comment early on about how you deliberately picked a worse school, right? You had your ordered choice after the PSLE, if I remember correctly, and you picked the worst one as your top choice, and then you very ominously said, and this would have a ripple effect on the rest of my life. But you don't then go into great detail about what that is. So between the two of you, I'm very curious about, whether first you could elaborate on that, but also as someone who's just gone through the basic education system, is looking for universities, right? What kind of reforms you'd like to see to our education system. So maybe you first, Liyana.
Okay. Addressing the liner that I've made in my book, right? I would say that at that point where I made that decision to forward with that choice that I've made before, it's more so on my rebellious state, because being young and and looking that it doesn't change what I hope for it to be. That is where I put it across to me having going through what I need to according to my own terms. And according to my own terms, meaning that I would want to really experience it in this education system from where I am at. And if they are saying that this school is worse, okay, so what do I need to experience in this worse school, right? And then live through it and see what are the changes that can be done out of that. And I think it also boils down to when I say that we will need to be the example in a way, not example as in it come across as an ideal throughout to everyone, but at least one example where, not everything is one way, and there are multiple, life in itself is intersectional, and we got to embrace that. And because of that, we don't see things just as, when we are looking at education, we don't see that, these are good schools, these are bad schools, but go through it, study in that education system that we are in, that I was in before, and see where are the changes that needs to be done, and that is where I am now today. Yeah.
But I mean, what's something that you would change about the education system? Because you have, again, a unique perspective, right? You come from a part of the education system that I think I can safely say none of our ministers are even remotely familiar with, right? What's something that you would change, structurally about the education system?
One thing is not to determine from the get-go of a young person's, option at a point of time, that once you choose that, you are doomed. So there's no damnation at that point of time. And because I myself have gone through the education system that none other ministers have went in, right? There are still a lot of changes to be done. One of that is just no damnation. And secondly, to see success apart from just paper and qualification.
Would you say that you experienced discrimination while you were in secondary school?
Oh, what sort of discrimination?
I mean, choosing, to go to the worst school, quote unquote, right? I mean, how did that affect the way that people saw you? How did that affect the way that your family or your relatives related to you? How did that affect the way that your neighbors or your friends engaged with you?
Oh yes. Okay, so with that, choice that I've made, right? So I usually get discrimination is just something that is like a part of day-to-day life. And society or people that I met will usually undermine my abilities. And even say that we are just, like akin to society's garbage in a way. Yeah. So if that amounts to part of the discrimination that I face every day as I was going through the system, I'm almost desensitized to it actually.
Okay.
Well, that's not something you should be desensitized to, right? I mean, it's like you've undergone so much pain that you don't feel the pain anymore, but you shouldn't have felt that pain to begin with. So that's a terrible situation to be in. But if you don't mind me pressing you a bit more, when you say no damnation, do you mean something structural, like making it easier for students to, say, if you've had a bad year or made a bad decision, to then recover and move up into different streams or different schools, to add on extra years to be able to redo exams with no penalty, that sort of thing? Or is it more of a societal thing you're suggesting, where we as a society need to stop focusing so much on paper qualifications and recognize that people are differently abled and have different talents in different ways?
I think it's many-pronged approaches here. One will be, if you're talking about the education system, making it easier or removing the barriers of entry at certain points, even if someone were to make a different choice, right? Certainly, there are ways that we can do that still, and it still needs a reform in that area. Secondly, society. We still have a long way to go to, get people to embark on not seeing success based on paper or qualification, but seeing the experiences or the other values or skill sets that an individual being bring to the table. And lastly, all of this is the intersections of the policies that we made from the government sector, right? From top down. We are still top-down approach at the moment right now.
Yeah.
We still need to work there.
Elijah, you are just fresh out of school, so you should be very familiar with this topic. What would you change about the education system?
Yeah, I guess I just graduated from a school that is a SEP school for the secondary sector. So I feel like having lived through these like 4 to 6 years in this school, I feel that Chinese privilege here is like very real, and there's a very strong level of ignorance towards issues of race. And because like social issues are so intersectional, when there is this echo chamber of like ignorance, there's that general sentiment in that school already, then like the people kind of naturally didn't care about other social issues as well, like say climate change or LGBTQ plus issues. So I think like aside on top of like how SEP schools are inherently problematic because of how it gatekeeps non-Chinese speakers, right? I think there is a serious need to review like why we even still have SEP schools right now. Is there like what's the relevance and how like what roles do SEP schools play, and what is the necessity in still like having a school specially for Chinese speaking people, right? So I think that was the first thing that came to mind when I thought about like school reforms. Another big thing definitely with like the whole thing about the transgender discrimination in schools, right? I think broadly speaking there's a need for greater like inclusivity as a whole, in terms of making sure that teachers or school staff are equipped with sensitivity training and knowing how to deal with sensitive topics like race, LGBTQ+, and what are the policies that are protecting these students. Like for instance, for LGBTQ+ students, what are the policies in place that ensure that teachers do not out the student to the parents when they are not ready, and things like that. And also, I had it but I lost it for a second. What was I thinking about?
That's okay, take your time. We can just edit this.
Alright.
SEP schools, inclusivity.
Inclusivity. Oh, sexuality education.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think like there's a serious need to like review like the curriculum that students are being taught. So like for sexuality education, for instance, it needs to go beyond like the very strong enforcement of abstinence and what else is there, like the message that like in terms of sexuality the only route is forming a nuclear heterosexual family sometime in the future, have kids, and that's like that's your life, you know. Like the curriculum has to go beyond that. And I think we also have to bring into the sexuality education discussions on like what LGBTQ+ is and what gender is, like everything that has to do with sexuality education, right? Like create a platform whereby people, even if they disagree, have the space to like discuss these issues and be properly informed about these stuff, rather than like having kids who are confused for the bulk of their life and only realizing that, oh, maybe I'm bi when they see some YouTuber like years later. So there's a need to have these more inclusive representation, especially in schools when these are the formative years of children, and like just from a young age incorporating the sense of okay, this is the diverse world we live in, and there are people who do not look like me, and that's okay, because just as to like create that open-mindedness and sense of inclusivity in every student. So I guess that's mainly like,
I mean, I love that there's three very cutting points there, right?
Can I so I've been loud in my condemnation of SAP schools, and I think in my podcast with Subhash we both expressed great unhappiness because of course he went to Chinese High and my son goes to Catholic High, and we were very unhappy about the conservativeness of those schools in many ways. But let me try and take their point of view, and let's have a discussion about that, because I think that's something worth unpacking, especially since you've just gone through that. which is, I think, the Chinese schools, right? Let's call them what they are. The SAP schools are the traditional Chinese schools. Would argue that they have been systematically discriminated against for 150 years under the British colonial government, which never gave a damn about them until independence approached, and suddenly they were like, oh, these schools are subversive because they encourage loyalty to China, and then tried to crush them and destroy them. And then they finally are able to win independence. Singapore wins independence and also managed to set up Nanyang University, Nanta, right, to defend and give a venue where Chinese speakers can have their own educational stream and protect their education, their culture, their way of life, only to find less than 2 decades later, the PAP government shutting down Nanta, ending Chinese language education, and then trading that off by, what was that? Yeah. Ending, so let's just take, let me do it. Ending Chinese education, shutting down Nanta, and then trading off the ending of Chinese language education by creating SAP schools, and so giving greater resources to the traditional Chinese schools. So a Chinese speaking person might say, hey, this is the only avenue for us to protect our traditional Chinese language and culture that has evolved in Singapore over the decades, even century over. And we have been so discriminated against by an English-speaking elite, the colonial elite, the PAP elite. We've had our schools shut down. We've had, our media forcibly bought over by Singapore Press Holdings. We can't teach in our own language. And now you want to shut down the one thing we have left, which is just a bit more resources for our traditional Chinese schools. Why are you discriminating against us? Why do you want to destroy us, right? So how would you respond to that kind of argument for sort of the right of a minority community, the Chinese-speaking Chinese, for especially in the context not just of Singapore but broadly speaking in Southeast Asia, the right of a minority community to have its own language and culture?
I mean, I do know that there are quite a few clan associations around in Singapore, so I think they are doing a pretty good job trying to preserve some sort of Chinese culture and things like that. So if that's something you really want to cultivate, you can go to these clan associations. There are avenues outside the education system that you can turn to. I think when we think about discrimination and who are you protecting, right? In the context of Singapore, it's fact that the Chinese population is more than 70%, and we are the privileged racial group in Singapore. So when you talk about protecting the Chinese heritage and the Chinese culture, what you are doing is it's more so gatekeeping other people of other races from tapping into the resources that these MOE schools could provide. So I'm not saying that for SAP schools if we do I don't know, I mean that's a whole other discussion, the whole review of SAP schools, right? But what I imagine it to be if we reform SAP schools is that these schools, sure, they can preserve the physical campuses, the history of the schools, these kind of things. These are pretty normal things that every secondary school have anyway, the school history, and maybe if the school has the facilities, a heritage center which describes the school history and things like that. These things can be preserved. No one's gonna erase the history of these schools. But I think the question here is, how do we open up these these slots of being a student of this school? How do we welcome people of diverse races into SAP schools so that they also benefit from the education and resources that these schools can provide? Yeah.
And so what if again, just trying to play devil's advocate, they say we are not privileged. English-speaking Chinese are privileged. We're Chinese-speaking Chinese, and we are not privileged in English-speaking Singapore. In some ways we are discriminated against because everything's in English, and I have to go abroad in order to, or turn to sources from abroad in order to read and speak my own language, right? But here everyone wants to speak English, and we're forced to speak English, and it's my culture that is that needs protecting, right? How would you respond to that kind of argument?
I mean,
A sort of denial of
yeah.
privilege, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to be in an environment where everyone is speaking Chinese, SEP schools aren't the place to go either. Because, like, honestly, like, from my own experience at least, barely anyone speaks Chinese to each other in the school. Everyone speaks in English. And Chinese standards in SEP schools aren't fantastic either, pretty ironically. Because I remember in Sec 4, before our Chinese, like higher Chinese O-levels, like 3/4 of the cohort was in remedial. So like, if you want a learning environment where with a high standard of, I guess like a command of Chinese, it's like SEP schools aren't really the place to go either. Pretty much like from my experience, SEP schools, like what they do to retain like Chinese heritage or privilege is like, for my school, we have like 1 week of like playing Chinese chess, like wei qi, and like drinking tea, and like that's it, that's our Chinese culture. So like it doesn't make sense either, like why we have SEP schools to preserve this sense of like whatever they think Chinese culture may look like, because like in their heads, okay, maybe it sounds good that we have a space for Chinese speaking Chinese, but it doesn't even like substantiate in SEP schools, and that's not really, I guess, like the focus that SEP schools are trying to have either. And I think the current function of SEP schools, from what it seems, is just, okay, we're going to have a population of mostly Chinese people who are all Chinese speaking, and and it's an elite school, so I think like for the most part, SEP schools are pretty much gatekeeping non-Chinese speakers lah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting point. Like your actual experience of it is kind of different from what it's become a symbol of, and what it's actually achieving is not what people read into it, right? It's become a symbol for a certain protection of Chinese culture, language, whatever. But from your experience, which is very powerful because you've gone through 4 years or 6 years in this secondary and JC system, and it's not actually accomplishing what it's supposed to accomplish. So how would you change the system? Would you just do away with SEP schools, or would you want to offer a new way for these schools to move forward? And specifically, you mentioned ending gatekeeping. What would you like to do with regards to our system as a whole to reduce or end discrimination?
I guess like the main problem with like what gatekeeps people from entering SEP schools in the first place is like that it necessitates like you taking higher Chinese in primary school or something like that, like to make sure that you are Chinese speaking. So just do away with that, like let SEP schools exist as any other like secondary school where people of any, like according to like their qualifications of their PSLE results or whatever, can apply to. And it shouldn't be like their ability to admit into a SEP school should not be on the basis of whether they speak Chinese or not. So I guess that's the main thing that.
And if I can add, there were Malay kids who went to Catholic High Primary with my son who could speak Chinese and did higher Chinese and did as well as my son in PSLE and were not admitted to Catholic High. And I find that very suspicious. I'm not going to say, of course, that anything deliberate happened, but I find it very suspicious that someone who comes from a feeder school and meets all the qualifications and did every bit as well as the Chinese students somehow didn't get in, and they happen to be of a different race, right? So gatekeeping, yes, I fully agree. So please go on.
So I guess like the what's that? Like the eradication of that gatekeeping, and within the schools itself, how do they implement more inclusive policies? Because for my school, like our school song is in Chinese, so if we admit people who are not Chinese speaking, how are they gonna like understand the school song and like the school values and things like that? So there will be a need to like tweak like small things like this as well to ensure that the school is an inclusive space for everyone regardless of their race when they enter these schools.
I mean, if we remove the gatekeeping and we make the school more inclusive, is there anything left of a SEP school?
I
Right.
mean, there's still the history which you can read up on if students are interested, but most
Just
of the time I
becomes
don't
the
think.
abolishment of the SAP school, right?
I guess. But I mean, they still have their physical campuses. They still have whatever statues that they brought in from years ago. Yeah.
I mean, they can still teach certain things, right? It's but if a Malay or an Indian or someone is willing to, and interested in learning it, then they should have the opportunity. They shouldn't gatekeep and say, oh, you need to be of a certain background in order to study this, and you don't need to be so aggressively. Again, I think gatekeeping is the right word, right? To kind of limit things to a certain. Let people choose their own lives, and let parents also, choose what is best for their children, rather than the schools trying to throw up barriers in pursuit of a sort of ideal that doesn't even really exist when you actually look at it on the ground, as you've described, right? And a world that doesn't really exist anymore, because what is traditional Chinese culture anyway, given how drastically different the PRC, north to south is, or Hong Kong or Taiwan, or Chinese in the diaspora, all very different, speaking, writing different languages. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that these are really the amazing discussions that we need to be having, right? But I mean, we're sort of out of time, right? But before I wrap up, Liyana, I want to ask you about your fundraiser. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, the fundraiser that we did not. Okay, actually, Elijah is actually part of it too.
Oh, nice. Chime in. All right.
just nice. Have you seen the video though?
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
You've got a link, right?
I think so. Yeah, on the
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so please do see the video. It sent across the message on its own, but at the same time, this particular fundraiser is to benefit 4 beneficiaries actually. 1 migrant mutual aid, and 3 current charities.
Okay.
1 is Babes, Beyond Social Services, and Aware.
All right.
So that's part of the fundraiser that I had recently launched during my birthday.
Oh, very nice. So how can we get involved in this fundraiser?
Oh yes, please. You can either go to give.asia /MJLD fund to donate.
All right.
And please do share the page around too.
Very nice.
And why these organizations?
I think partially because of my own life experiences, and given that I wish they were the ones who helped me or come across me back then, and I know that of the wonderful works that they are doing right now because I have been volunteering with them. So yeah, that is why.
So if we like to get our hands on a copy of your book, how can we do so?
Oh, go to Kinokuniya, Popular, especially Huck's Epigram, or even you can go on to Epigram website directly.
All right. And finally, Bidanlo, talking about the RDU's youth wing, how should we contact you if we're interested in joining?
Oh yes, please visit our social media. We got RDU on IG, Facebook. Visit our website, and please write into us directly.
All right, very nice. So thank you so much for coming. This has been an enlightening interview here with author, entrepreneur, and politician Liyana, and our youth wing member of the RDU, Elijah. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us.
Yeah, thanks Liyana, thanks Elijah. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I have to say I'm really impressed by your answers, and very insightful, thoughtful, comprehensive. So I wish you all the best, and I hope both of you succeed at what you're trying to achieve.
Yep.
And of course, thanks as always to my co-host, Sean Francis Han. Thank you for excellent questions and moderating. Thank you to our members on our member Discord. As always, this has been live streamed to our member Discord. You've put up questions and made comments. It's been really, really helpful. And if you'd like to join as a member, all of you listening, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to join as a member, you get access to the Discord. You get to watch these live. So join at newnarrative.com/join and donate at newnarrative.com/donate. New Narrative is entirely dependent on membership revenue and donations, so we really do need you to support our work. So if you find this important, please do join. Thank you very much, all of you, and see you next time. Bye.
And stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna